History branded her a beast, but the gods, you see, the gods were the true monsters. I want you to imagine a silence so heavy it feels like it has weight, pressing against your chest in the damp darkness of a forgotten cavern. Step forward with me into the gloom, where the air tastes of salt and ancient weeping stone. Here, the shadows do not dance. They cling to the shapes of men who have been forgotten by time. You see them standing in rows, their faces twisted into masks of absolute, unadulterated terror. To the passing traveler, they might look like the works of a master sculptor, but look closer. These are not tributes to the human form. They are tombs. These men were once breathing, dreaming warriors who met a fate more final than any blade could deliver. I know the story you have been told since childhood, right? You have heard of the golden hero Perseus, the favored son of Zeus, who ventured to the edge of the world to slay a nightmare. You know the name of the creature he sought, Medusa. In your mind, she is a shrieking horror, a tangle of venomous serpents for hair and eyes that turn warm flesh into cold gray marble. You have been taught to cheer for the sword that severed her neck, believing it was an act of divine justice. But as I stand here, amidst these silent witnesses, I must tell you that everything you think you know is a deception, a tale spun by the victors to hide a much darker reality. For millennia, the truth of the Gorgon has been buried under the weight of heroic lies and the cruel whims of Olympus. What if I told you that the monster you fear was never the predator, but the prey? What if the snakes were not a curse of malice, but a tragic shield against a world that had already broken her? Today, I will peel back the layers of myth to reveal the woman beneath the stone. Whisper closely, for the echoes of the past are finally ready to speak, and they have a story of betrayal that will change the way you look at the gods forever. To understand the shadow, I must first show you the light. Long before the stone-cold gaze and the writhing serpents, there was a girl whose name was spoken with reverence, not terror. I take you back to an age of shimmering marble and eternal sunlight, where the Acropolis rose like a crown over the city of Athens. You see, this was the world of Medusa, a mortal of such breathtaking grace that her beauty was whispered to rival the very stars. She was the pride of the Parthenon, the most devoted priestess to serve within the sanctuary of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. I want you to see her as she was then, draped in white linen, her golden hair catching the Mediterranean sun, and her heart bound by a sacred vow of purity. For Medusa, the temple was not a prison, but a sanctuary of absolute peace. Her devotion was her armor, right, and her service to the goddess was her greatest joy. In those days, she walked with the quiet confidence of one favored by the heavens. In the eyes of the mortals who traveled from distant lands just to catch a glimpse of her, she was a living icon of grace. But in a world where the gods are as tempestuous as the sea, beauty is never just a gift. It is a beacon. And as Medusa moved through the hallowed halls of the temple, the shadows of Olympus began to lengthen. She was a mortal playing in a divine fire she could not yet feel, unaware that the gods were watching her every step. However, even the most sacred of vows cannot protect a mortal when a god decides to take what he desires. Because while Athena's favor was a shield, it was also a target. And there was one Olympian who had already set his sights on the prize inside the temple walls of the Parthenon. The air within the sanctuary grew heavy, thick with the scent of brine and ozone. I can tell you that the golden light of the afternoon did not simply fade. It bled, turning into a bruised and violet storm that smothered the temple in shadow. You could feel the shift in the very stones, a tremor that was not born of the earth, but of a rising, suffocating tide. Poseidon did not come to the temple as a suitor or a king. He came as a force of nature, driven by a cruel lust and an even deeper desire to humiliate his rival, Athena. In his eyes, Medusa was not a person, but a prize, a piece of sacred ground to be conquered. I want you to imagine the deafening silence that fell over the halls as the Earthshaker stepped onto the hallowed marble. There was no lightning to save her, no voice from the heavens to command him to stop, right? In that moment, the sanctuary became a cage. The tragedy of this moment is not found in a sin committed by a woman, but in the absolute entitlement of a god who felt he owned whatever he desired. Medusa, the girl who had given her life to the divine, was left utterly alone, betrayed by the very power she worshipped. But as the storm finally receded, leaving only the wreckage of her innocence behind, a new shadow began to fall over the temple. Because while the sea god had finished his work, the goddess of the temple was finally ready to pass her judgment. And what she saw in the ruins of her sanctuary would change the course of history forever. Athena did not descend with the mercy of a protector. She arrived as a cold, unyielding force of order, her eyes scanning the desecrated marble not for the survivor, but for the stain upon her sanctuary. To the goddess, Medusa was not a woman who had suffered. She was a relic of a failed purity, a shattered vessel that could no longer stand in the light of Olympus. You see, there was no solace offered, no gentle hand to pull the girl from the freezing stone. Instead, there was a proclamation of absolute, terrifying transformation. Imagine the sound of it if you can. The air in the temple grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and ancient dust. Medusa looked up, her spirit already fractured by the sea god's cruelty, only to find her deity's gaze fixed upon her not with pity, but with a clinical, detached disdain. Athena reached out, and as her power took hold, reality itself seemed to tear. It was not a punishment for a crime committed, right? It was a brutal, final reordering of Medusa's existence. The change was agonizing. Feel the weight of the air as the soft, pale skin of her arms began to harden, the flesh knitting and warping into rigid, shimmering scales of bronze and obsidian. Her hair, once a symbol of her beauty and her station, began to writhe of its own volition. The follicles split and twisted, lengthening into living, breathing serpents that hissed with a newfound, singular purpose. I mean, this was not merely a curse. It was the birth of a living fortress. Athena was stripping away the vulnerability that had led to Medusa's ruin, forcibly crafting her into a creature so lethal, so horrific, that no god or mortal would ever dare approach her again.
She was being turned into an apex predator, a masterpiece of isolation. Every scream Medusa tried to release was swallowed by the rustle of 100 serpentine tongues. When the transformation finally stilled, the girl who had served the temple was gone. In her place stood a weaponized nightmare, a guardian of the forgotten, draped in scales that could deflect a hero's blade, and eyes that carried the weight of a gaze no living thing could survive. But as Medusa stood amidst the ruins, feeling the venom pulse through her new form, she began to realize something even more devastating than her loss of humanity. This armor was not just meant to keep others away, you know? It was a prison designed to last an eternity. And yet, I must ask, was this truly the limit of Athena's cold logic? Or was there something hidden within that gaze that the legends have dared not whisper until now? The mirrors of history are rarely clear. When I look back at the jagged edge of Medusa's tail, I see something far more chilling than a gorgon turned to stone. We are taught to fear her reflection, to recoil from that gaze,
because we are told it is a manifestation of pure, unadulterated evil. But I ask you to consider the possibility that we have been looking at this all wrong. We fear her eyes, because we refuse to face the haunting truth that monsters are not born in the shadows. They are painstakingly crafted by the powerful who wish to bury their own transgressions beneath a shroud of legend. Think of the vanity required to rewrite the history of a woman wronged. Medusa was not a creature of malice, but a survivor cast into an eternal exile. She stood as a living monument to a god's indignity, forced to carry a curse that ensured no one would ever look upon her true face again. When Perseus finally arrived, guided by the cold, calculating hand of Athena, he was not a hero venturing into the dark to save the world from a beast. He was an executioner, sent to silence the only witness to a divine crime. He carried a shield that acted as a mirror, and in that, there was a biting irony. He could only face her by refusing to look at her at all, protecting his own soul from the reflection of a tragedy he was complicit in ending. By turning her head into a trophy, the gods ensured that the victim would forever be remembered as the monster, while the perpetrator remained untarnished in the annals of time. We have been conditioned to cheer for the man with the blade, haven't we? Never pausing to ask what right he had to claim a life that had already been stolen once before. As you reflect on this, I invite you to look past the snakes and the stone. See the broken woman who was discarded by the very heavens that claim to represent order and justice. The myth of the Gorgon is a warning, not of the danger of monsters, but of the danger of those who define them. History is often written by the victors, and in the case of the divine, those victors are remarkably skilled at hiding their blood-stained hands. If this journey into the forgotten corners of our past has moved you, if you find yourself questioning the narratives that have shaped your understanding of these legends, then join me. Subscribe to